Hi, welcome to AI Uncovered. I'm your host, Tim Martin, and also the leader of product at EasyOp, a company creating AI software. In this podcast, I'm going to search to learn everything about AI, the market, the tech, and some real-world applications. I'll be interviewing some experts and folks executing on AI and extracting critical insights about this technology for our listeners. So let's get started on a path of deeper learning about AI. Today, my guest is Rohit Sood. He's a seasoned executive with a strong background in commercialization and technology and life sciences. He is currently advising a variety of life sciences service companies and private equity firms on operations, growth, and digital transformation. With over 25 years of experience in the life sciences and technology industries, Rohit has held various leadership roles, leveraging his expertise in AI, cloud computing, and digital transformation. He holds a degree in computer science and applied mathematics and an MBA from Rutgers, and is currently an adjunct lecturer there. He is also pursuing his DBA in the area of scientific and technological evolution and its impact on oncology commercialization. Rohit is passionate about the intersection of technology and business and enjoys actively mentoring startups and young professionals in the tech space. Rohit, thanks so much for joining the podcast today. Super interested in getting deep into digital transformation in life sciences and ways that AI is playing a role. Let's start with what are you up to today? What are your current engagements in digital transformation, and what gets you excited about working with the companies you're advising?
So I've been working with three different types of organizations, working on different types of solutions related to digital transformation as well as artificial intelligence. And what I'm finding is the problems are the same as what we experienced 5 to 10 years ago. And what I mean by that, with one organization that I'm working with, the biggest challenge that they are facing right now is upskilling the team and changing their way of working to be more digital centric than the traditional way of, very labor intensive type of process improvement. So while there is a mandate from the leadership team to become more digitally enabled, there seems to be some resistance to either changing the way of working or learning new skills to be able to do things faster and smarter, because they're still used to doing things the old way. Another firm that I'm working with they've developed this very cool AI platform for project management, but now they're trying to find a solution. So you've been in product development, you always try and do some voice of customer before you start developing a product or minimally viable product. So they had developed this asset, this really cool tool for a very specific function. And now we're doing a lot of voice of the customer discussion to see what are the big business needs and how can we adapt this application for them, for this new target segment within life sciences. So again, some of these are very basic challenges that a customer that a company that's developing an asset or is trying to transform themselves would experience. And the last company that I have been working with, it's more like a PE firm that is trying to build a pharma services platform, but their initial thesis was very people oriented, buy an agency, buy a consulting firm, put them together. And I'm trying to change their thesis to be more digitally centric, and then building a people component around it so that you're able to scale the business faster to a certain level.
So you noted that change management's a big factor. What about data? When you work with companies, are they ready for digital transformation on the data side? Clearly, this is a big factor when it comes to working with AI and getting value out of that. Where do you feel the life sciences industry is today?
So I feel there's a lot of data, and there are also many data vendors today who can help you achieve your business objectives. So there's so many different types of data sets. You can look at IQVIA, you can look at Definitive Health, you can look at MMIT, you can look at Komodo Health. Each of them provides a specific type of data set. The challenge for a life sciences company is what business problem are you trying to solve? And based on that problem statement, what kinds of data do you need? The next question that I find companies trying to tackle is, do we need to build our own data lake, or do we just rent the data to achieve the same outcome, right? Or we buy a cohort of the data. So there's an infrastructure cost and an infrastructure design element if you're trying to tackle the data question. So the strategic question that I try to ask at least my clients is like, do you need to build this, or do you just buy or rent the data as needed? And I think that's where I find companies sometimes, actually often enough, are trying to do everything on their own. And this idea of creating an ecosystem where you focus on what your core business is and build those partnerships so you can use their data set or an application or something else.
And when you look at the state of data today, I mean, we hear all the time that 80 to 90% of data out there is unstructured, and companies in the life sciences space need to get value out of this data. Do you see this problem getting solved, or is it still kind of one of the major problems with your companies today?
I think it will get solved, but it's not a global macro solution. I think you're going to get it solved based on a specific customer segment type of data. So for example, what I mean by that is you have look at a company like Komodo Health. They've got this market map and they're connecting the de-identified data from different sources and creating this data map for the US market. You will have other companies like Definitive Health that are doing the same thing, but they're focusing on the IDN segment, where they're looking at affiliations and decision making just for that segment. So you're going to see some companies trying to tackle the big, can we look at all types of data set and put it into a map, which is quite a daunting task. And then you're going to see most companies trying to develop data links or data maps, structured and unstructured, for a very specific function. So if you look at medical, your data linkage there with structured and unstructured might be PubMed and all these literature, the medical journal articles, along with KOL and clinical data and some publication data and conference data, and then you map it all together, but you're focusing on just the medical function. That's where I see the data going, from structured and unstructured. So not like, think of it as, rather than having a large language model, to a small local model.
And if we kind of go out a little further away from data and just talk in generalities about digital transformation, when you're working with these companies, what separates the successful ones from the ones that struggle? Is there a couple of key success factors that kind of stack up and really differentiate, good from bad digital transformation?
Yeah, there are a few. There's actually a really good book written by David Rogers, and I forget, it's called The Digital Roadmap. He's got a couple of them. And I think if you follow him in that book and the way he lays out the roadmap, while it doesn't sound like rocket science, it's actually not rocket science. It's very straightforward, step by step. Do you have a strategy? What are the priorities from a digital transformation perspective? So which specific areas do you want to tackle where you have the largest return on investment, right? From there, you start thinking about cultural change management. Do you have a plan for that? And that's not just training. It's constant reinforcement. It's internal communication, and also and sometimes capability development or upskilling the team as well, right? So if you think about digital transformation, companies that don't do this well is they're trying to do too many things at the same time, and there's no cohesive strategy that ties their transformation effort together. And then there's the cultural and people component that if you don't pay attention to that, it will never like hold. It will never take or become institutionalized as a new way of working or a digitized way of working.
Yeah, we've seen that as well on my side, where if you don't have the end users involved, right, in the process and the transformation early on, it's much harder to get them to buy in later if they haven't been part of the process. And I think that's one of the important factors for
True.
success. Now, when you're working with these teams, are you working with innovation teams? Which ways are you finding these companies become more successful? Is it through a specialized team? You mentioned it's important to find high ROI kind of applications. What's the best way to kind of go about that early in the process?
So I've seen it done a couple of different ways. I've seen companies do hackathons where they kind of get the entire organization involved. There may be a chief transformation officer, a chief digital officer. We certainly did that at Eversana with some success. There were some incredible ideas that were generated, a bottom-up approach. And then you have a governance team that actually looks at these ideas and then says, prioritize them, right? So the priorities may be driven by a business need or financials. Very often you have all these great ideas, but there are only a few things that you can do at a specific point in time. Then the question is the execution of it. So once you prioritize, then you've got to think about, is there an owner of that digital transformation effort? Very often you'll find that the owner may not be the same person for all kinds of transformation efforts. They may report to a chief transformation officer, or sometimes a CIO or chief digital officer, sometimes a CEO. But the person leading that effort may be different. And what I mean by that is sometimes you may have someone with a technology background from your tech group leading the effort, with a cross-functional team from business as well as legal and finance. Very often you may have a business owner that is driving the transformation because they understand the nuances of the business and what will it take to actually make sure that that transformation is impactful. So it's like saying you don't use technology for technology's sake. It has to say you have to use it with a very specific purpose and objective in mind. So that's the way I'm seeing successful companies structure their transformation teams very differently.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And as you take a look at, the digital transformation, and of course, I'm very interested in AI applications in general. When you look out there and you look at big success stories that you've been involved in, what do you see? What are the applications of AI that are really making a difference in driving ROI today?
So I will start by saying that everyone talks about AI in life sciences, but there's still quite a bit of resistance to using AI for some legitimate reasons, right? There's the AI hallucination. There's this credibility issue that I think as these models get more sophisticated and tried, I think there'll be a lot more trust in the models and the applications that we will be using. Where I see AI being used or transformation happening is in three different areas. So there were the early transformation, which was more like around automation. So a chatbot, right? You get into a hub, you've got these list of questions, you have a question, it answers the question, gets you to a certain point, but can be very frustrating for the end user. Because I remember calling into my carrier sometimes, and at some point in time, I'm just saying, I want to talk to a representative, and it still keeps asking you the question. So I think AI has to get better there. So that's the whole automation. And then there are also processes like contracting, right? So a lot of companies have developed these contracting processes that just automate. They have templates, they allow you to do that. That's digital transformation, but it's not really AI driven, the way we have started to think about AI. The second is prediction. And I think prediction is happening in many, many ways. The one that is most interesting right now, I see, is productivity tools in life sciences. For example, look at literature reviews, right? from clinical to medical to HEOR. Literature reviews are used in those three areas. It's a very labor intensive approach because you're sifting through documents after documents. I used to run an HEOR business at Syneos Health. And when you talk to these guys, they're just sitting there with their heads down, sifting through reams and pages of information. You have companies today that have using natural language processing, sift through all that and get you a literature review that gets you to 75 to 80% of the work done before a human has to get involved. So the future of that could look like if you have to present that lit review in a Word document, it will get you to a Word document as opposed to you having to copy it, which shouldn't be that hard, but it will standardize, categorize it in a format that is usable by either a regulatory body or a payer or someone else. Right? So that's one area I see a lot of interesting things happening. Medical insights is another one. Omni-channel, you hear a lot of that. It's a great aspiration. It works, but I haven't seen the outcome of that yet. Right? This idea of creating profiles of your customer groups and then proactively targeting them with messages based on data that you get from the field or from a lab. Because this idea of next best action, I think you're seeing a lot of use cases there that are becoming very interesting.
Yeah, so you brought up hallucinations a moment ago, and clearly that's talked a lot about in the generative AI space.
It is.
And you mentioned as well that you find that generative AI or some of these NLP processes can be really valuable, maybe early on in a process to get through the tedious parts where there's lots of information, and then helping people kind of get kind of closer to a solution. But then there's human in the loop, right? So the human kind of takes it across kind of the last mile there. Is that the way you see it? And if you look at generative AI, there's hype and reality today. Where do you think generative AI is really overhyped, and where do you think people are being too critical?
So I think generative AI has a lot of value. Like, let's take ourselves away from life science and look at ChatGPT, look at Claude, and look at all these other platforms that you can really make yourself more efficient because it gets you started, right? You can ask a question. If you're sending an email to someone, you can phrase it in a right way. You get a baseline email that you can customize. So it's helping you think faster and execute faster. So I think there's a lot of promise there, and I think it'll only get better with time. Where I see, at least talking to folks in my clients, where they're struggling is this idea about generative AI or AI in general as being such a powerful tool that it'll replace humans. There is a fear factor associated with that. And I think this is where the more you learn and the more the internal communication is there around that we're using this to make your jobs easier, is making your job more efficient. So the faster you learn how to use the new process or these tools that we're developing for you, the better it's going to be, right? So that's one. The second is this idea around adoption where data integration, process changes, that's the other part that I'm struggling with, seeing teams struggle with, where because of their fear, adoption is slowing down, right? And the last thing is around this hallucination piece where do you trust the accuracy and the fairness of the data or the output, right? What is the recent news with Google when they launched their AI search component where they were equating using glue to make things stick on their pizza? I don't know if you remember that news. It was
Yeah,
like
yeah.
a couple of weeks ago. That's just an opportunity to improve your model, to improve the algorithms behind the scenes. So I think those are the kinds of things that get highlighted more in the press, the negatives,
Right.
rather than the positives. And I think with time, if you think about synthetic arms and clinical controls, your work, your background, right? There's a lot of good technology, AI being used there to generate synthetic data from real world evidence, or to generate real world evidence from real world data that allow you to speed things up. But it's taking a long time for the industry to get there.
Yeah. Yeah. I liked some of the things you said there about the practicality of it all, right? I mean, people need to upskill. They need to
Yep.
understand generative AI and what it's capable of and maybe what it's not so good at, right? And then use it in a way, humans plus AI, so that it gets you value quickly. And don't use it for the things where it's not as good,
It's not
right?
good. But
And my,
if I can add one more thing, I think the other challenge is that AI without data doesn't work, right?
right.
And there's still a lot of concern about privacy and ethics of AI, which is those two areas that with more regulation, and I don't know if that's a good thing. It's just a right that at least clarifies uses. Uh, I think this will become more of a SO, like a standard way of working or status quo than the fact that it creates all these hurdles in an individual's mind about using AI.
Yeah, I work. So I think we've made great strides in regulated industries like pharma, right? Where, there's a sense of maturity now where people are talking about privacy and, data security, and you can't have an enterprise platform without any of that stuff. I worry more about the shadow IT stuff where people are just using this on their own at work and putting in company data, right? And I think this is once again where people need to understand what can happen when you do that. Maybe you need to have some kind of guidelines. But do you see that as well?
I haven't seen it play out as much yet or at all. But I think the governance behind AI and having rules and going back to training and communication where folks understand, like when social media came out, Facebook, right? Many companies just blocked you from going to Facebook.
Right.
There are still companies who do that. So I think IT policies, the governance of data, the governance behind AI, the use of AI applications, the governance around using ChatGPT or Gemini at work, right? I think there'll be these policies that will be instituted at some point because companies have to protect not just their data but their customer data as well.
We've talked quite a bit about the state of market today and where generative AI is and data is and change management. We're kind of in the midst of this now. When you look forward in time, say 5 years or 10 years, what do you see being resolved? Do you think the world in life sciences gets so much better? Or do you think, just like historically, it just takes time and generally life sciences and big pharma are just slow to kind of adopt new things? Where do you think we land?
So there is so much investment taking place in just AI in general, right? I read numbers where in 2023, the number was somewhere in the $200 billion range, right? With a potential CAGR of 35, 36% till like 2030, right? Like those are like astronomical numbers. I've also read that 90% of AI startups fail, right? So that's just a baseline of that there is interest, that the aspiration is there. You brought up earlier this idea of our industry is very regulated, and they are. While everyone talks about it, change comes slowly. But once you see a proof point, people start adopting it. And the proof points are emerging in clinical today, right? Whether it's synthetic arms, it's speeding process, patient recruitment. There are platforms that just specialize in patient recruitment, right? Um, filing your regulatory filings in a discipline, in a fast manner, that with a high degree of accuracy. Drug discovery is another area. So those proof points will will allow the leadership of pharma to believe that AI does work. Right now, big pharma is definitely exploring all these different options with many, many different companies. But when you're a startup, there's a limited cash component, a limited cash flow. So you have to manage that. You already have a risk of developing an asset, but now you have a risk of trying to create a new operating model or a new way of doing things. It just adds to the risk. So I think the more proof points we have, um, the more this will become status quo. But I see in the next 5, 6 years where many of the processes like automation of labor intensive exercises like a lit review, or publication planning or KOL identification, right? Things of that sort will be where AI will play a really important role if it isn't already, where these things will become very different. And that then has a downstream impact on the pharma services operating model, right? Because these are like services that these consulting firms and agencies provide to pharma, whereas now technology is taking them 80%, 75% to a final solution. So what is that operating model? And I'll give you
Right.
a very interesting example. We were working on a Alzheimer's asset and we were doing a positioning statement. Keep in mind, we use ChatGPT for this just as a test because the real data is all behind firewalls, right? So ChatGPT is not going to create a fairly accurate positioning statement. But we did ask, with some parameters and caveats, write a positioning statement for us for this asset in this with this kind of data. Now, we didn't use that positioning statement. It was okay. But there were phraseology or phrases that were in that positioning statement that made it to the final positioning statement, right? So in many ways, like think about the implication of that in the future, or Sora AI, right? I don't know if you played with it, where I'm an agency and I'm trying to create a video for a campaign, just a 30-second video, and I narrate what that looks like, right? And I click a button and it generates this video for me, as opposed to the production cost and all the other things that we would have to do. The only thing I would focus on is the copy.
Yeah, no, I've seen some really good AI applications that allow you to do, for example, product videos, and produce this stuff in, minutes as opposed to hours, right? Or having a crew there and doing a variety of things that used to cost a lot of money. Now you can do it very quickly. I also, you brought up Sora, and a lot of people have talked about Sora and the success of Sora being high quality data sets, right, generated by OpenAI. And I think you alluded to this previously with the idea of large language models and maybe smaller models in the future. But I also feel like high quality data sets can be a huge differentiator when you're building smaller models and focusing on narrower tasks. I think that helps deal with hallucinations and some of the other problems. Would you agree with that statement? And are you seeing people use these smaller models today?
I haven't seen anyone use, or I'm not aware of anyone using a smaller model, but I know that is a big trend, or at least been discussed in conferences. I think the other area is multimodal models, where you're looking at text and imagery and video and all different types of data and kind of creating a model out of that. Um, and the other interesting thing that I heard was this agentic workflow agents, AI agents, where
Yes.
think about your workflow that you create just like a human mind thinks and you break tasks into simple things. Imagine a AR process being done by AI where each of the steps in an AR process is now there's an AI agent that does that, right? But it's all behind a firewall. So you're trying to, again, protect your data, but it simplifies things where you don't have someone trying to go through invoices and then trying to figure out what's outstanding and what is 30 days out, what's 60 days out. what is current, right? You're essentially creating agents to do that entire workflow. I see pharma using that in their back office operations for legal, HR, and finance in a very big way, right? It's like there was this interesting news from Google. I think it was Google. No, I think it was OpenAI or Google, where the Brazilian government is working with them on their legal briefs so they can cut down court time. Right? I think it just came out like a few days ago or a week ago, which is I thought fascinating. That now there's a government initiative to look at AI from a for the legal function or justice function, essentially.
Yeah, I see a couple things in kind of what you just said. One, agents I think are going to be very prevalent very soon. My team's working with them already, and we see some value there for sure, because once again, it helps automate more complex tasks a little bit more in software, and I think that's super interesting. AWS is pushing a lot of this
Yep.
now. I know OpenAI, at least I've heard they're working on it. So I do think that that's going to be really interesting stuff hitting the market not too far from now. And I think we saw the Apple announcement just a couple days ago, right? And they're doing some interesting things on device and helping with privacy and a strong positioning statement there. So that's pretty interesting stuff.
I
And
think you're going to start seeing ecosystems develop if they haven't already, right? So Google Cloud and a whole ecosystem around Google, Microsoft and Apple working with OpenAI, right? So you're going to see really interesting. Elon Musk just raised $6 billion, so who knows where he's going to take this. So you're going to have these very interesting players coming in, and then you're going to have this ecosystem of transformers, or you're going to have ecosystems of application developers, of functions or agents. That just like we had like the Intel versus an Apple chip at one time, you're going to see some of these things play out as well.
oh yeah, NVIDIA, AMD, and
Nvidia, absolutely, yeah.
Uh, I think, there's been some discussion too. You brought up the Brazilian government. I mean, if people are starting to make big models to handle things within a country, for example, or they want their own large language models, you could see that a lot of GPUs are going to be required, a lot of expertise. But it feels like, yeah, to your point, there's going to be a lot of different uses of models. I think there's going to be a great place for large language models, small language models, and them cooperating as well. So this is, I think, super interesting. We talked a lot about some of these bigger items, but you mentioned earlier about startups, right, and differentiation in startups. I know you're a big mentor to folks in the tech segment. So what advice do you give startups now? It's real hard now with AI to, build products that are differentiated that can't be built by other folks. So what do you tell people, young people, if they want to get into the AI field or build products with AI, what should they do?
So I was talking to a CEO of a company, and she said something that totally resonated. And they are still in, I would say, startup phase. And what she told me was she talked to 300 business users before she started an AI business, right? So getting the voice of the customer, understanding what is the problem that you're trying to solve when you create a minimally viable product or any business, right? You're not a consultant where you've got enough experience, you can become an independent consultant or have a consulting firm. But when you're building a product, people have to buy it, people have to consume it. So start with understanding or identifying that business problem for which you're going to create a solution. So that's the first baseline. I think that was brilliant. The second is capital. You need money, right? So how do you raise money? Is it venture capital, friends and family, just to get you to a point where you have something to show a partner or a client and raise additional capital through a Series A, Series B, whatever that might look
Mhm.
like. I think that is quite an art, and people who are good at it will go really far. So that's the second thing. The third is Um, Business is all about generating revenue, and you've got to get to be able to sell. So find people who can sell and can go talk to clients who have relationships, who can speak about your product to generate revenue. And I think the fourth thing I would say is, as you get to a certain point, so you're no longer a startup, or you may be a startup, but you're in your seventh, eighth year or sixth year, start thinking about scaling if the revenues are coming in. Because most founders tend to, or they like to control things. It's what makes them very good, right? But as you're scaling the business, start thinking about which professional leadership team members do you need to help you think about that next inflection point, right? Very few think about it that way. The ones that have been very successful have done it very well. So
Yeah, that
that's where
makes
I think about it. And then for young professionals who are thinking about AI, I always talk to them about, you got to read a lot, go to conferences if you can, talk to folks who are experts in this area. I'm a technologist by training, but I haven't coded in the last 15 years. So when I talk to folks, the methodologies have changed, the vernacular has changed, uh, but I can still connect the dots to say, okay, this is what you really mean. And it's like, yeah, that's what I mean, right? I never heard about a vector database until like a year and a half ago, right? We used to think about SQL database and data warehouses. Those things, while still relevant to a certain degree, are obsolete in many ways.
So I liked what you said about, understand pain points, understand your customer, right? That's still the most critical thing you can do as a startup. It sounds like, from your perspective, the technology behind solving that problem, whether it's AI or other technologies, is just there to use to solve the problem. It's not about, I got to build this great Gen AI platform. It's kind of the same old thing that everybody's used to doing in a startup, right? Is solving a really critical problem for a key customer.
The way I think about it is the business problems don't go away. They're the same business problems. They just manifest in different ways, right? The mindset you have to have when you're building an AI product is that you've got to be digital native. And this is not my phraseology. I've kind of stolen it from someone. You're no longer a traditional, I hired these people and yes, maybe we'll think about it, right? You're thinking digital right from day one. And so as you're building that business, start thinking about how do you, even your operating model that you have, what can you do with things that already exist rather than having to build everything on your own?
Yeah, makes sense. Okay. And so one last question here. So how do you build a moat? So startups don't have a lot of data, so you can't really use a data moat. Where do you, is the moat, where can the moat come in if it's not data? What would you
So,
recommend?
so just like synthetic data, I think you can create a proof of concept by creating synthetic data, right? Because that shows that if I have this terabytes, gigabytes of data, I can use that and it predicts A, B, and C, right? But that also is an art. So there's one way of doing it. You computer generate. I used to work in trading systems, and the way we tested the trading systems was we would create artificial or real-time market data that would just go through this feed that we would consume just to see if you're consuming it in the right speed and is it actually sending me the right data. It's just interesting. So you can do that. Second is you can partner with data companies. Say if you're developing a medical imaging product, AI-based medical imaging product, talk to a hospital and co-create it with them, where they have some rights. I mean, you have to give up something for that. So don't think you're in this alone, but it does take a while to get a partner to work with you, right? Very often you could work with a manufacturer and say, hey, I have this idea. And if we create this, would you be interested? How do we get this to happen? If it's an idea worth pursuing, you'll be amazed as the big pharma may actually be interested in helping you develop it as well. But the idea has to have some real ROI.
Right, right. It has to be a powerful
Powerful thing,
solution,
yeah.
a problem that they have. Yeah, that I think that's great advice. Okay, we're at the point in the show where I'd like to do the AI uncovered fast four questions that I pepper you with, and hopefully you can give some quick, interesting answers. The first one is, do you have a favorite book about AI or digital transformation that you would recommend?
So I have two. One I already mentioned, David Rogers' Digital Roadmap. He's got a few others that are pretty good. But I just finished reading Eric Topol's Deep Medicine. So he's got three. It's part of his what he calls the 3D series. I think digitization was the first one, democratization was the second one, and this D is the deep medicine piece of it. It's fascinating. He talks about the use of AI in diagnostics, in surgery, in treatment design, etc. So there's a lot of it's a wealth of information in there. I wish I could quote a few things, but it was really a good read.
That sounds excellent. Okay, and then do you have a favorite movie about AI?
So Tim, I'm going to date myself. Terminator and Matrix series, big fans of those. But I recently saw Upgrade on, I think, Netflix or Hulu, I forget which one, which is basically this person who becomes a quadriplegic and a chip is implanted in his brain, and the chip takes over his muscle, his movement, and he's able to walk again and do a lot more than walk. But that's all I'm going to say about that movie. Pretty good movie.
Oh, cool, cool. Yeah, I love The Matrix as well. Terminator, yeah, well, it's brought up a lot, right?
T1 and T2.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. People talk about that and the existential threat of generative or
Yeah.
general AI, right? A lot. So, but great movies. How about your favorite AI application that you use today?
So there are two, and one that kind of takes me down a rabbit hole all the time. I think ChatGPT and Grammarly are ones I use quite a bit in my day
Okay.
to day. But I discovered this other app called Namelix, which is essentially for branding and naming a company. It is phenomenal. But what I found myself is that you start looking for something, and about an hour or two later, you're still looking for it because the options are so many. But it's a pretty good tool. I think you just got to pick one name. So
Oh, nice.
it'll
Okay.
change
And
branding in a big way.
so name Lex, how do
N
you
A
spell?
M NAMELIX.
Okay, great, great. And then finally, the critical question that everybody's concerned with, the singularity, right? So sentient AI. Lots of predictions there. What's your prediction for sentient AI?
So I remember reading a research paper that in 2000, that was written in 2010, that researched, I think, what, 1700 or 1800 thought leaders in AI. And they predicted that this would set the, sentient being would be in place in 50 years, so 2060. And I think with large language models, including, with the evolution of that, do you know who Jeffrey Hinton is?
Yes.
His Godfather, yeah. I think he believed, I think last year there was a podcast that I heard him talk about between 5 to 20 years. So we're in the 2040 range, 2045. So probably in our lifetime, for all you know.
It sounds in line with a lot of the other things, or a lot of other folks that are making these assessments as well. I'm hearing most answers that I get on this podcast are within the next 20, 30 years. So, well, Rohit, thanks so much for spending time on the podcast today. Really appreciate you digging into digital transformation and AI with me, and wish you the best in the future.
Thank you, Tim, for having me. It was a great conversation.
I wanted to thank Rohit for being on the podcast today. Really interesting discussion on life sciences, digital transformation, and the use of generative AI in the processes in this industry. He also gave us a great insight as to how startups can differentiate themselves and some insights on how to best proceed with digital transformation and what's been most successful from his work in consulting. I hope you enjoyed the podcast and look forward to seeing you again